The collapse of the Western world is guaranteed. There are too many factors at play for it to be averted, too many areas in which the degradation is not only palpable, but also very near and already clearly visible right in front of our eyes. Within our lifetimes, we are almost certain to see a radical change in the way the world works, much more than is currently noticeable. The collapse of the West will cause ripples through history, and if you are wise, you will liberate yourself from it as soon as possible, before it is too late. Why this is happening is a rather large topic, and I've made two lengthy videos talking about this, links in the description. The word collapse sounds rather vague, ominous, and implies a sudden shift from the status quo, so let's go into more detail in this video. How exactly could or would such a disaster occur? Before we get to the potential manners of this collapse, let's first tackle three scenarios that are pretty unlikely to happen, yet they are possible nonetheless. Civil war is a war within a nation, where two large armed groups of citizens actively wage war on each other, with the aim of ruling the country, defending their rights, and/or complete annihilation of the opposing faction. An example would be the Civil War in the United States in the latter half of the 19th century. As it stands, a civil war will almost certainly not happen in the current Western world for many reasons. At the moment, the average Western man is too weak, lazy, and feminized to pick up some weapons and actively join an armed resistance. Young people are, by and large, apathetic, dulled by porn, social media, and other vacuous entertainment. However, once things deteriorate and a country has already collapsed due to other factors, or is well on its way there and it's obvious to everyone living there, civil war might become more likely. And yes, there are definitely already toxic subcultures of angry, misogynistic, and disgruntled men. Can't really blame them. But do you really see those engaging in active warfare? Sure, you'll have groups of I'm tough with a mask on in a large group cowards, like Antifa and Black Lives Matter members, who indulge in regular rioting, arson, robbery, and the destruction of private and public property. Such instances of civil unrest will become commonplace, most certainly in the United States. Civil unrest will be a daily occurrence for people in the West, but armed gangs of thugs roving around is a far cry from an actual civil war. A lot of Americans are armed to the teeth, so in that country, such a scenario would be more likely than in Canada or Europe, where weapons are way less ubiquitous. China or Russia wouldn't mind taking over the West. In fact, they'd gladly do it if they felt like they could. But currently, this is not the case. Even a collapsing West is still strong, militarily speaking. Attacking the Ukraine or Taiwan isn't the same as landing troops in Texas. The chances of a foreign nation invading the entire Western world and causing its collapse are pretty slim. However, as this collapse becomes more obvious and the West gets weaker and weaker, such a scenario cannot be ruled out indefinitely. A gradual disintegration of the West and absorption into new world powers does seem possible and even likely. Once countries start seceding from the European Union, Putin might swoop in and incorporate some of them into Mother Russia, like he did with Crimea, and is trying to do with Ukraine, and might do with Georgia. The same could happen if, for example, Alaska were to become a separate nation. I'm a bit conflicted when it comes to the topic of nuclear war. On the one hand, I do not think that we'll get involved in a devastating nuclear war. Nations and the ruling elites have too much to lose. But once Western theocracies become a reality, with people who do not only believe in an end times, but actively work towards it having access to nukes, well, you're better off not being anywhere near them. This is in addition to current theocracies like Pakistan, most likely already having nukes and potentially targeting a flailing Western nation or assaulting one of its allies and prompting a nuclear response. The Western world is unlikely to devolve into some sort of Mad Max post-apocalyptic world. Global society has advanced too far for this to happen, but I wouldn't say it's a non-zero chance. So if civil war, foreign invasions, and nuclear war will most likely not occur, how would the collapse of the West manifest itself? Once the factors I've described in previous videos have gone on for too long and reached a tipping point, there are two ways things could play out: a rapid collapse or a slow decline. It could go either way or a combination of both, as a slow decline is currently already on its way. It could just keep on going like this for many decades until it reaches a tipping point and a sudden event finishes off a particular and severely weakened Western nation. Before we continue, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below. It really helps with the algorithm and I'd appreciate it. Okay, now let's talk about how a rapid collapse could play out. Normal inflation is bad enough. Every year, the government prints more and more money and the value of the currency goes down at an equal pace. A dollar today is worth less than a dollar in a year's time, usually only slightly less, a couple of percentage points, but over many decades, this seriously cuts into the value of any money you might have saved up. And inflation could turn into hyperinflation, which basically means what it sounds like, excessive and steeply ramped up inflation. Hyperinflation generally goes hand in hand with wars and ill-advised fiscal policy decisions, causing a rapid increase in the supply of money, which is unsupported by growth in the economy. Your currency becomes more and more inflated and more worthless. Paying $100 for a loaf of bread might sound silly now, but hyperinflation does not only make this likely, it can also go much further. We need only look at some examples of the past to see how bad it can get. Over the course of the previous century, there have been roughly 17 cases of hyperinflation, 5 in Latin America, 4 in Western Europe, and a few more spread across the world. Back in 1944, Greece had a whopping 13,800% monthly inflation, meaning that prices doubled every 4.3 days. Germany had nearly 13,000% monthly inflation back in 1923, contributing heavily to the popularity and rise of the Nazis and Adolf Hitler, and of course World War II. Yugoslavia in 1994 saw prices double every 1.4 days, causing inflation to rise to a whopping 313 million%. In 2008, Zimbabwe had a price doubling every day, resulting in nearly 80 billion% inflation, causing ridiculous situations with a single banknote having a value of 50 million of their currency being printed, each only being the equivalent of about a dollar. Hungary in the 20th century tops this sordid list with a whopping 13,600 trillion% inflation, and prices doubling every 15 hours. In every single one of these cases, government mismanagement and wars were at the root of the problem. While the US has never suffered from such a serious case of hyperinflation before, it has come close on several occasions during its first few wars when the government was wantonly printing money. If you're at all aware of the current climate of stimulus packages and other supportive measures taken by the government, paired with several costly wars being fought all over the world and a gargantuan debt, you'd be correct in guessing this could very well lead to hyperinflation. Another path to American hyperinflation could lay in the fact that large nations more and more start to break away from using the United States dollar as a currency. Right now, the USD is the world's currency, by and large. Most international business gets conducted in dollars, and many countries are keeping a large supply of them. However, once it becomes more and more clear that the USD is losing in value due to the aforementioned normal, but still increasing inflation, and another contender for the world's preferred currency pops up, most probably the Chinese yuan, it's very possible that trillions upon trillions of dollars get dumped back into the United States economy. Prices will skyrocket and hyperinflation will occur. This in turn will of course prompt other nations who are doubtful about letting go of their stores of USD to get rid of it as well, causing even more inflation. A vicious cycle, which will probably be the most likely cause of the collapse of the US, as it can cascade into plenty of other seemingly unrelated issues. The situation in Europe and Canada is better, but their national debt is still rather large, and the printing of money is very much alive and kicking, with often vigorous support from their populace because it gets them free stuff like welfare. If a war were to break out between European nations, hyperinflation could certainly occur there as well, but as it stands right now, it probably will not. Regular inflation of over 10% being sustained for many months or even years on end is probably the worst that will happen there, but you'd be correct in thinking this is still a horrible situation to be in. Another possibility that I should mention here is deflation, the opposite of inflation. This basically means that a currency rapidly goes up in value, which means you can buy more goods tomorrow with the same amount of money than you could have today. While it sounds good in theory, and slow and healthy deflation can certainly be a good sign, rapid and sudden deflation could also be paired with a strong economic contraction, which means that stocks and commodities rapidly fall in value. This can generally occur in debt-heavy economies revolving around central banks, as is the case in most Western nations. Countries that are heavily in debt rely on the ongoing expansion of the supply of credit, so that asset prices can be inflated through speculative investments. This is a debt bubble, and when it pops, debt inflation can lead to massive business failures, bankruptcies, and rising unemployment. This puts the economy in a heavy recession. By itself, this will probably not be enough for a collapse, but depending on the scale, it definitely could be, or at least be a strong contributing factor. Secession, in simple terms, means a breakup of a political entity where smaller, usually formerly independent areas of a bigger union start to split off and go their own way again. As an example, the United States used to be a colony, but then seceded from the British Empire and declared its independence. Because of the escalating political polarization and lack of a working democracy, the Western world could very well end up with several secessions. In Europe, the United Kingdom already seceded from the European Union. A lot of words have been spilled on this matter, arguing for and against, and the shocked indignation of Eurocrats when Brexit actually occurred was rather interesting to watch. Small territories of EU member states have already taken this step in the past. French Algeria, Greenland, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, and Saint-Barthélemy. Three of those have since become overseas countries and territories of the European Union. So while the UK wasn't technically the first country to take this measure, it certainly is the most prominent, the most important, and the most impactful. And it likely won't be the last, with political parties in many nations advocating the split. Poland and Hungary could very well be next in line. European countries are simply too heterogeneous, full of internal and external political strife to be able to cooperate well in the long run. In addition, the European Parliament is a near totalitarian institution, full of highly paid, sometimes unelected bureaucrats who impose all kinds of laws and restrictions on the member states. Laws and restrictions those states might not agree with. It could be only a matter of time before the citizens of several countries decide they've had enough, elect national politicians who sense the shift in public opinion, and vote to leave the EU. If we go deeper than that, specific nations could also split up into several entities. Catalonia in Spain, Flanders in Belgium, and Scotland in the UK are just a few examples. The more divided countries get, the more politically polarized, the stricter the laws on what their citizens can and cannot do will become. This will breed contempt among subgroups within a nation, whose clamors for independence will become louder and louder, and probably ever more violent, contributing to already heightened levels of civil unrest. The United States is in a similar situation. Despite being technically a single country, it consists of dozens of states, which are commonly described as either red or blue, denoting that state's majority political preference. These states mostly adhere to federal law, but there are also local laws, which sometimes vary wildly from one state to the next. A good example would be the issue of abortion or cannabis, which could be legal in one state, but once you cross an imaginary line on a map, you could get thrown in jail for it. When a red president like Trump, or a potential candidate for totalitarianism like him, attains power and keeps it for a prolonged period of time, the blue, left wing, semi self sustaining states, such as California, might seriously consider their independence and secede from the Union. And this goes vice versa, and probably even more strongly, for red, right wing states when a Democrat gets elected, or steals an election, whatever, and becomes president for a long time. However, this probably will not happen anytime soon because these kinds of states are, for the moment, too reliant on the federal government for all sorts of reasons. But it might happen, depending on many factors. This would be unprecedented in the history of the US, and it'd be very interesting to see how this would play out. A war could also cause a rather sudden collapse of a Western nation, and historically speaking, this is one of the most common and likely reasons why a country would collapse or cease to be. By war, I do not mean a devastating, potentially world shattering event such as a nuclear war, or an internal civil war where two armies inside the same country take up weapons against each other. A war in this context falls in scale between those scenarios, larger than a civil war, but smaller than a nuclear war. For example, Russia could attack another nation, yet again, such as Georgia, prompting some response from NATO. Depending on how sincere this response is, it could easily escalate. However, as usual, NATO will most likely do nothing, just impose some weak sanctions and condemn Russia's actions. But if Putin goes too far and refuses to back down, there might not be another option than actual war. Internally, the EU could experience a war as well, such as Poland or Hungary getting fed up by the nonsense the other countries keep imposing on them and taking up arms against another nation. It'd be a very silly move, but it could happen. The US is currently already involved in several wars, as it has almost always been, so these small scale proxy wars by themselves would not cause it to collapse. They've become a matter of fact, just another normal day at the office for the most belligerent nation in the world. However, at some point the US could stretch itself too thin, fighting too many wars at the same time and draining its already depleted resources, causing other issues such as hyperinflation. Or it could take up arms against a nation that can actually retaliate in a meaningful way, such as Pakistan or China, or even North Korea in a few decades. Apart from that, there are plenty of powder kegs around the world where the Western world is indirectly involved in or will inevitably get drawn into. Pakistan and India are always at each other's throats, and with both now having access to nukes or being close to it, it's only a matter of time before an overzealous general presses the wrong button. Israel and its surrounding nations have always been at war, and the US is heavily connected to the former, so it will almost certainly rush to its defense if something serious were to occur. All in all, historically speaking, wars have been the overwhelming catalysts of revolutions and the collapse of empires and nations, so the possibility of one of them occurring and dragging down the West in its wake is certainly there. Totalitarianism comes down to a centralized and dictatorial state which requires total obedience and subservience of its subjects. Yes, this is already the case right now in many Western nations to some degree, but it could get much worse. A dictator, a strong, usually charismatic, always male leader, attains power in a nation, either through legal ways or through a coup, and takes over every aspect of that nation. Examples of totalitarian leaders are Stalin and Hitler, Mao and Kim Jong un. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are well on their way to this status. And if Trump doesn't die of a heart attack before he's back in power in 2024, he might very well become America's first real dictator, as he has expressed sympathy for the concept of a president for life and has shown a clear penchant for rousing people to violence and an unwillingness to admit defeat. As you can imagine, this is not a very pleasant scenario because it will heavily impact personal freedom, the cornerstone of happiness. If such a leader were competent and benevolent, he could potentially be a force for good for that country and put it back on the right track. However, as has always been the case, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and totalitarianism always results into a total nightmare for citizens. Borders get closed or at the very least tightly monitored. No immigrants or different people are allowed in the state. Civil liberties get thrown out of the window. Martial law goes into effect. Freedom of speech becomes even more of a joke, and so on. Most people in the West will see no problem voting for such men because they are sheep and want to be led. Could this happen in the West? Yes, it definitely could in the long run. As it stands right now, probably not immediately, But men like Donald Trump are certainly setting the tone and paving the way for increasingly belligerent, corrupt, and totalitarian leaders. This once again emphasizes the importance of setting up several bases across the world and never relying on any one nation. Apart from the potential scenarios which cause a sudden collapse, there's also the matter of a slow decline. The term collapse of the West invokes the image of a sudden event, an implosion of the world as we know it. And while scenarios such as war, hyperinflation, and secession definitely fit that bill, there is also a very likely possibility that some Western nations will not collapse, but rather slowly deteriorate into inconsequentiality. In short, the superpowers of today might just crumble down over the course of many decades until they fade into irrelevance and or get absorbed into the new emerging superpowers such as China. The US might still be here in 50 years, but it won't be the world's leader anymore. It will be a small, debt-ridden, bankrupt specter of its former self. Historical examples of a slow decline are numerous, such as the British, Dutch, and Portuguese empires. These nations used to rule the world not that long ago, and now they didn't collapse or go out with a bang, although wars were of course a factor. They're still around, but they have become and are becoming increasingly irrelevant, a far cry from their former glory. While I think that the US and Europe will collapse in a more sudden manner, a slow decline seems a likely outcome for Canada, provided it doesn't go under when the US collapses because it is so closely tied to it. To end the video, let's answer the question, what can you do about it? Well, the answer is both depressing and uplifting. You can do absolutely nothing about the collapse of the Western world. Nothing you do will have the slightest impact whatsoever. The only thing you can do is save yourself and escape the West. Become self-employed. Set up several sources of location-independent income and get the fuck out. Great options to move to are countries such as the Philippines, Paraguay, Dubai, and Thailand. Attain residence in at least one other nation and set up several bases across the world. This is the only way to be sure you'll prosper in the coming decades and not get dragged down in the inevitable downfall of the Western world. There we go. Hope you got something out of this video. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How do you feel about this topic? Do you think I'm full of shit and pulling stuff out of my ass? If so, I'd love to hear your arguments in the comments below. If you want to learn more about this topic, check out my website, escapingthewest.net, or consider purchasing my new book, available on Amazon. See you in the next video.